what we got through the preparations for last week, the Lord's Prayer. The deep esoteric meaning of the Lord's Prayer. And so part of that preparation, well, before I'll go into an introduction, I'll just make sure that everything's working. And while I'm looking up to make sure everything's working, I just want to say to everyone that the second part of the stream, as we finish the subject of the stream, goes on Discord for the fellowship only. But the content happens in the first half. I mean, there's content in the second half too, but that's where we have a discussion. So, yeah. Do subscribe, do like the stream, and also become a member. Go to my website. Become a member. And all will be well. Now I'll just quickly check this. It's working on Streamlabs. Check it on X. And we'll check it on YouTube. Sorry for the delay. We do have to check it, though, until we get really certain all this is working. Make sure this one's working, too. Sorry, again, for the delay. You got the nature vibes there to watch while I check this out. So let's do this and double check. Stand by. It's not letting me do it. Okay, I think it's working on X. Yes, it's live on X. And I'll just make sure it's also live on YouTube. It's live on YouTube. All right, everyone. Sorry for the delay. I had to check. We won't need to do that as we go on into the future weeks. I just had a few errors to begin with when we first started doing this live show. So, the Lord's Prayer. Let's jump on over into our presentation for today. Here we go. Bang. All right. So, the Lord's Prayer. Last week we went into the preparation talking about destiny and judgment. And so if you haven't watched that and you're watching this, you should still be able to understand, but that will really give you the idea of what this is really to do with. Because there are things that changed with the reality of the world since pagan times and since the Old Testament. Things about reality, things about time that this image shows you with the keystone, which is why I'm showing it up here first. And just as an outline of what that was to do with, it's about really the coming of Christ being the intervention that makes it possible for us to affect our own destiny, our own karma through collaboration with him. And I talked about in that stream about destiny is the word, Western word for karma. If I've used destiny as a word casually to talk about providence before, I probably shouldn't, but it's easy to use destiny because destiny's, it's this thing that you don't know that you're meant to do. But destiny really means it's the same thing as fate. It's a destination based on what has been, rather than providence, which is the opposite. It's a destination based on something outside temporality. So destiny is a slaver. Destiny is a slaver, and that's what the stream last week was really about, getting to the ground of that and the reasons why Christ is providence, and why providence is something new, and why you escape the eternal return of the same dead being, which is the fake eternal, by the Lord's Prayer and by collaborating with Christ. So what is the Lord's Prayer? A general outline of it. So the first three petitions of the Lord's Prayer are about, as we've talked about before, three sacrifices. They're about the sacrifice of thought, the Luciferian thought, for the divine name, which we'll find out. And these three things relate to different petitions of the Lord's Prayer, but they're about the sacrifice of the Luciferian thought, which is tied up with who you are. As an ego, you are a separateness. When you're thrown into the world, as in existentialism, Heidegger calls it throneness, because you're not connected to essence when you're thrown in. That's because of the fall. That's because of the worshipping of the serpent, eating the fruit from the serpent. That fall is wrapped up in your separateness before you can connect with God. And so there's three that are about the sacrifice of thought, feeling, and the will, which are tied up with the oath of obedience, poverty, and chastity. So they're the first three petitions. Then there's four others, which are to do with the man in his non-transcendent self aspects, the unconscious, the ego, the physical body, what esotericists call, in terms of the unconscious, I talked about last week, the vital body and the astral body. These terms will kind of scare people. They're just things that they came up with to really talk about an area of where sin and guilt is, and then an area where will is in the unconscious, really. Another word for it, vital body is one word for it. The etheric body, they also call it. But it's just talking about the unconscious, like I talked about last week. And so it's to do with that. The different things that make you up as an organism. This whole prayer deals with the complete man and his harmony with collaboration with God. And that's what it is. It's about the new option. It's about, instead of having to repay every wound with revenge, you can pray to your Father to be released of it, and he'll intervene. So that it's the new justice. It's the new covenant. The Lord's Prayer is about that. That's how important it is. And so, I mean, it's something you should be doing daily, but we'll get into why as we go into the Lord's Prayer and how deep it is. But it is essentially about healing and healing karma. Again, karma, I only use that word because the Western vernacular is used to that for meaning what goes around comes around. What goes around does come around. Karma is like a mist that surrounds you. Destiny is like a mist that surrounds you, that you can't get rid of, that there's nothing that you can do to get rid of this stuff. There's no therapist or demonologist, as I called Peterson, and all therapists are kind of demonologists. There's no demonologist that can help you in this region. They can only help you with the domain of will. They can't help you with the vital body, the deep, where elements of your character are. These, it was described by esotericists. I think Rudolf Steiner talked about this. The vital body as like the hour hand, and the astral body like the minute hand, in terms of your being, your character, like deep set characterological things that have been since you were a baby, heredity. And then the astral body are the more recent things, your more recent desires and lusts and that sort of thing of the will, to give you an idea of the difference between those two things in esotericism, quote unquote. Not like Christian esoteric, like Christian Hermeticism anyway. So, but again, this is really about the Lord's Prayer. We're not talking about esotericism so much, other than the deep meaning of the Lord's Prayer anyway. But let's go over to the next slide and talk about Hallowed be your name. Name is, in the biblical sense, is deeper than just a label. It's locked up and to do with also like divine knowledge and mission. It means mission in the Bible. It also sort of means it encompasses your whole being. So to say, hallowed be your name, is to ask for, in a sense, to ask for the Lord to be present. It's to have your low empirical name, your given name, your parents give you a name, and in the Germanic sense, it used to be your profession, right? Your name, the knowing space that you are, is again that Luciferic name. So this is about the sacrifice of the petition itself is only granted through a justification, and that is by the sacrifice of thought. How is that done? Not just in the prayer, but outside of the prayer, in poverty, through concentration, through monastic silence, through concentration without effort. If you don't know what that is, go to my earlier videos about that. But yeah, holiness. What is holiness? Well, it's something that can actually be, in a sense, holiness is the name too, is his name. And that in the sacrifice of the low empirical subject and his thought, that emptiness allows for God to be present. By sacrificing your sin, by getting rid of your sin, that holiness can be present. And so it's very complicated. It's calling for more than, but it is about the sacrifice of thought, but it's about deep things, and also an unutterable name as well. But we could just talk about how it's justified as well, because it's partly justified by the image and likeness of God is in all of you, all of us. His word, the letters of his word are that image and likeness. The word I am, or I amness, is the esoteric name of God. I am that I am. I am. Well, what does that mean? You go. And existentially, you think, I am. I am. You don't just look at the proposition. You can sort of look at your I amness here now as it watches this stream, as it watches this video. That I amness, okay, that's the, let's talk, that's the self, right? Okay, the self. It's behind that. There is no human word for that word, but your I am, and he is that I am. He's more I than you yourself are. He's more I behind that. So there is no, a human cannot utter his name. It's not even just about what the names are given, but there is an inherent security to that name I. I can't be given to anyone else. It can't be given to an object. Only an I can say I. It can't be, I can't say I about you. You're you. So there's an inherent security to it. And thankfully, because it protects it from cosmic R word of Ahriman and satanic forces, right? They could get into the language, because the language is very, demons play with the language, for instance. That's something that happens. That's very, they infect the language. But you can't get at that one unless you stop people, as they do with pronouns. They matter, right? Stopping people from using pronouns actually is a definite demonic tactic. But for now, the I is secure. But what does that mean? Again, for it to be justified, the petition for his name to be hallowed, it's for its own sake anyway. So it's the chief value. So it can be so, and he can be present in your experience by your sacrifice of the low Luciferic intellect. But that I, your image, the image of God that's with you, in you, the image and likeness, they are the letters that make up the word of God. So you have to justify it, acknowledge the freedom in every human of that. Because in each of these petitions, it's like, forgive them their sins, forgive my sins, forgive my trespasses. But for my sins to be forgiven, I have to forgive other people's sins against me. There is an implicit element like that. See how you have the justification there with that? You've got what you have to do, and you've got the petition at the same time. Each petition has an implicit justification. So we're going to go through each one of them today. And this one is that. It has to be justified by the overarching harmony of God's idea for you and everyone else, that make up the letters of his word, let's say. And so you have to acknowledge that to justify it in everyone else. Because all these petitions are collective in the Lord's Prayer. Notice that the Lord's Prayer is not my Father, it's our Father. Always, that you're asking on behalf of humanity. If you don't do this, it's not heard. If you don't understand it this way, it's not heard. You know, it has to be collective, because it's to do with original sin, for one thing, which is a collective thing, an original guilt, which is part of what the Lord heals in you, but also for something that you do as a sin in facticity out there is a collective thing. It's done in the world. You can't, again, this is why you can't fix the sins. That's why forgiveness has to occur. You can't fix it. It has to be God that heals it out of you. Those things will always come up as haunting demons of your past unless you go through the forgiveness exercises, quote unquote, of the way, truth of the way, which is part of the way, unless you go through that. And I've got a video on the specifics of that, of how to do it, you know. But yeah, so every one of these is justified, has to be justified. But the key is it's the sacrifice of thought. You are doing that to allow his name to come forth for the sake of his holiness, because holiness must be present. It isn't present now. It's hidden away because of our Luciferic and aromatic nature, because of our satanic nature, because of this all-encompassing techne or technology that's filled everything and dominates everyone and pushes everyone to do everything. Your God isn't God. You worship capital most of the time. I did too. I'm not addressing it just to you. Anytime I say you, it's about me as well. But our God, I mean, mine's not now, but the center, even most of the sort of low caps Christians are their master's capital, their master's techne, the master's, you know. So his name must be hallowed, and you must make the sacrifice for it to be hallowed so he can be present for you. But you have to do it first. You have to do the justifications first. And the prayer helps. The prayer makes that intervention because you're asking for him to miraculously help other people do these things. It's because it's always collective. It's always collective. So the prayer is always working magic. It's not doing it, but the collaborative element is doing it. Because you're always praying on behalf of someone else. That reaches the Father. Because it's behalf of everyone. It's everyone. Because everyone has the image. Doesn't matter how demonic the things are that they've done. They have the image and likeness of God. And so I've got here, may the holiness that is you be present. That's what you're asking for its own sake. May the truth be known of your secret kingship. He is the secret fire. I think you understand what I'm saying there. You have to sacrifice your lower cap's truth for his truth so he can be present. That's the point anyway. So the chief thing is it's about, oh yeah, that's another thing I should talk about, is that the highest thing of humans can do is to bear the crown of thorns, is to, once you've experienced the holiness, help others to find it. The highest mission, which is the mission of the name, is to unite heaven and earth, is to have the holiness be present. So that's the name. And the highest thing a human can do is to help in that. And that's a crown of thorns, because people will look at your videos on mystic experience and say, oh, schizo post or whatever, you know, whatever it might be. But you have to do it. That's the crown of thorns. You have to do it. You have to help. But that's the highest mission. That the name be hallowed, because it is. Because without that hallowedness, it's a separateness, and we worship the ultimate separateness from God, which is the evil one, which we'll get to. But let's move on to the next one. So your kingdom come. Hmm. So this one's about the sacrifice of feeling. And again, you can see here in the diagram, I've got way, truth, and life, and the different petitions that are related to these three things. And so this one is to do with life, which is love. But what you're doing is you're sacrificing your, again, through the oath of chastity, you're sacrificing your low valuation for things, for love. And you can see how that's tied up with the acknowledgement of the I, the sacredness of the I in other people, the sacredness of the image of God in others is tied up with that love. But it's about what this is about. It is an appeal. It is petitioning for the miraculous intervention, for that love to be in nature. And that's what a miracle is. It's, a bird landing. But God often speaks through birds all the time. An intervention in that way into nature is about love, which is Him becoming the ground of nature and it being obedient to Him, and that occurs as a miracle. As even Nick Land talks about that, about miracles. Synchronicity, as Jung talked about. The miraculous is a very real thing. But what you're calling for, because nature itself is fallen through original sin, one day it won't be like that. But it comes through our collaboration. For it to be justified, for the kingdom to be on earth, which is the future, which comes from providence, for that to be on earth, that moral love, that moral will to be everything, you have to make the transformation as your kingdom first. Your kingdom, like we said, you are, as Heidegger talks about existentially, you are this knowing space, this knowing of being that you are. You are that. It's not just your body, it's outside of that. It's the knowing as well. This openness being, Dasein, the here yonder being, from here to yonder, for as far as you can see, you are that. That kingdom must be transformed. Holiness must be present with you for the miraculous to occur in nature, because that's what will occur someday in a future epoch, where that morality will breathe through nature. It'll, again, this is very esoteric and very, I don't want to go into the detail of that, but at a future time, that nature won't be this neutral thing that it is now. I suppose you could consider it sort of like Eldar in the way they sort of deal with nature. Think about it. But yeah, the transformation has to occur with you first. That's what justifies the petition for the kingdom to come and the miraculous to occur. And of course, like we talked about last week, that collaboration is incredibly important because He doesn't intervene otherwise, because he's withdrawn for the sake of our freedom. That's the whole point. Because if you make Him responsible for all the evils in the world, it just sows the seeds for atheism. Like, oh, how come that parasite eats out the eyes of children, as Stephen Fry said? Because you got to pray for it. Okay. So fundamentally, for this to be justified, and again, it has to be justified for this to actually occur and the prayer to occur, even though the prayer on its own, because you're praying for others, does make progress in all these areas, you have to live for this future to justify it. You have, because the kingdom is the future. He is the future. Like I talked about last week, and again, why I did a whole stream for preparation for this, is to understand that your projections of the future aren't the future, your calendar, your plans, all that stuff. Existentially, there is no future that's really available past that, is there? But there actually is. You've got the now. The now exists for you. You can see it. It's present. The past, you can remember the past, re-organ, like it's an organ. You can re-organ or remember the past. But you can't do that with the future, can you? Or can you? Or can you? Yes, it's something that's available. That is God. And as Plato talks about, when he talks about remembering these things, this divine wisdom of the future can be remembered or reorganed. If you want to think about member as in organ, reconnected through initiation. Because you had that connection before you incarnated, because when you incarnated in your beginning, you incarnate from that future potentiality. Again, this is complicated time stuff that we went through last week. But the key is that you have to live for this future. You have to sacrifice the now and the past for this future. And the more you do that, the more the kingdom is present for you, for this openness being that you are, for this here, yonder being, for this Dasein, as Heidegger would call it, the more it becomes that. And also, the more the miraculous occurs and the kingdom comes. If the kingdom comes for you, as a fact of experience, and it does do, if you do this, then it will also, in the miraculous, in the shared space that where the others are, using Heideggerian terms, the others. But I think that's about it for that petition. But it's about the chastity oath. Like we've talked about again many times, you do that also through obeying the 10 Commandments in terms of imagination. Don't participate in the images that are in breach of that, in sin. Don't look at things that are in sin, and also practice exact symbolism. That's part of chastity, the chastity oath. And your surrender, and what happens through that process, how do you surrender feeling? Well, as I've talked about in previous videos, a transvaluation occurs within you, within your, again, using esoteric terms, you could say your, just your unconscious, let's say, etheric body or astral body you could use, but the unconscious occurs where what you previously valued is disvalued or obliterated. Because sin changes what you need. When you sin, you won't recognize the world transforming under you into hell world. It'll be a slow drift that you won't even notice. And deep in the unconscious, your needs will be transformed into desiring of like a drift, I better not say the words. You know what I mean? Online porn, whatever it might be, and all sorts of disgusting. Your sin actually drives that and changes the need. But you can go in the other direction too, through forgiveness, through chastity, through poverty, through, again, and the practices related to that, through obedience, the needs transform and transvaluate in the opposite direction. That's the sacrifice of that. And the unconscious and the deep healing occurs, and his holiness can be present then because you're not dirty. You know, that Seraphim Rose, that monk, that great American monk, wasn't wrong when he was saying that your sin's like a skunk that stops the Lord and his angels being present. That also you have to resist the temptations too. It's after the temptations, as we saw with Christ, the angels visit him after he passes the temptations. But yeah, that's that petition. And you can see how it's related to way, truth, life. But you have to live in the future for that future. That's what I mean by that future, is I mean that the Lord, for his life to be granted. So it's about that life coming. Virginal nature. When I've talked about virginal Zoe in the Bible, Zoe is the word for virginal life, virginal force, not bios. Bios is just derivative vitality based on what has been, the physical body. But to have virginal life, it's about this. It's about the kingdom coming for you. then you gain access to virginal Zoe, virginal life, that's free of the desires of temporality. So the future can grant you revelatory knowing of will and what to do, but free of temporality and the low desires that come here. So you're guided by something that's outside of all that. That's true freedom, to be guided by that. That's what we're after. Intuition. That's what intuition is, or it's divine revelation from outside. It's a matter of escaping. Not escaping, it's a matter of saving. Because escaping is the old value of the mistakes that the Indians made and the yogis made of escaping. No, it's saving. It's following divine will as an ingression of the kingdom from the future into nature to redeem all of it. Because one day it will all be redeemed. Nature as well. Not yet. But we can be. And the kingdom that is part of us can be. And it can be present for us. That's what that petition means. But let's move on to the next one, which is sort of tied up with everything that we're saying there. Being obedient to providence and divine will. And the next one is, of course, about will. And it's tied up with similar things, as you can see here. But the will, as we've talked about before, is related to your petitioning for his will to be done, his will to be on earth. Collaboratively, though, like we were talking about. Because if there was no need for collaboration, then we would not need to petition for it to happen. Again, it's about this freedom. It's about this or else we'd just be an organ of his, not loved sons, loved children that he wants to come back to him. We'd just be what Satan wants, Araman wants us to be, which is just his technical extension, which is the other kingdom that we're constantly having attack us now. And you see this technologically, the other kingdom, the serpent's kingdom, the kingdom of power, as wants you to be just a member, organ of the economy that just is provoked into everything. That's not what God wants for you. He wants free collaboration. And the ultimate freedom is this union with his will. Because it's from outside, because it's not a provoking from the past, from your heredity, from all these things. It's part of a divine plan that you meet in freedom. And he never overtakes your consciousness. He never destroys it like happens with yogis. He doesn't obliterate the person. He's like a surgical knife. He's the narrow way. He's the eye of the needle in his slow healing of you and your sins. So you can be that letter in his word of the ultimate thing that you could be, the ultimate life. He came to give you life abundantly. That's what doing his will means. It doesn't mean you're obliterated. It's a free collaboration. There's no greater freedom than that. Again, because it's outside time, because it's from the future, and it's not wrapped up in the provokings of the environment. And so all this seeking for freedom that we have, all this lobbying of the democracies of the, outside of proper hierarchy, is the wrong kind of freedom. Freedom, why is it the ultimate freedom? Because he knows what's best for you, because he grants you miraculously, if you go through this process miraculously, you're granted, as we'll see in the next petition, or the petitions coming up, the daily bread is granted. If you let go of the low context of the serpent, if you're still and it's so hard because it's in modernism, you're wrapped up in this context of the calculative. How do I get money for this? You're wrapped up in that. And it's hard to break free and make him the thing you trust, because then he takes it out of that context. Because the technical system that is technology, capitalism, all of this, the economy, it's completely inframed the entire planet. There are things wrapped up in the products that you use. It's connected to a dark will, and that affects your being without you knowing. You think it's just an object. It's not an object. If it's tied up with a whole technical process, and that is invisibly there without you realizing and has effects on you. The only way to protect yourself from that, you can't just isolate yourself. You can't be a, what are they called? Those Christians, Amish. You can't be Amish because it's in the language. Language is technology. You can't escape. The only way is to have the master, the Lord, be center. He can sanctify these things and remove them from the context so they can be used, for instance, which is what the daily bread's about. Then if he's the core and anchor and center of your entire life, and faith is granted and with you, things are, firstly, he's miraculously moving the world to help you, but also the things that you do, the object, the laptop, you're protected from these things, from the dark context that's underneath them, which we'll get to. But yes, this is the will. How do you again, we've talked about will before, how you purify the will. I think I just posted a video about that. It's about obedience to revelation as it's come down and been approved by the church. Revelation, the 10 Commandments, they have a deep esoteric meaning as well, incredibly deep. It's not just, for instance, one of them is the father and mother. The father and mother, honoring your father and mother is also about the tradition. Honoring the tradition is honoring the father and mother because it is your father. The knowingness being that you are, the knowing that you are, you're not just biological, you're also spiritual, you're also mind, you're also all these things. And so that is, you honor the tradition that came before. Hermeticism is the closest thing to, likes the most traditional types of Christianity, like orthodoxy, all the most traditional things. Christian hermeticist is a traditionalist. It has its is most in common with the raw experience of people that aren't tied up with metaphysics and intellectualism. It has its most in common with that. In terms of the end experience you end up with, is with a raw, like early Christianity, right? In terms of what they experienced, that's what they have more in common with a Christian hermeticist, even though it still deals with thinking and thought, but it achieves that raw collaboration with God. But I'm sort of digressing a bit here. But what is it? It's an aspiration. What are we saying when we're saying your will be done? Your will is the heart of hearts of my will, which languishes after your will, which is the way that my will seeks. Because will is way. The way that my will seeks. Again, this is to do with the 3 sacrifices we were talking about. The truth, the divine knowledge, which is him, which my will aspires, which is again purpose to return, to deify, which is the theosis that the Orthodox talk about. The truth to which my wish aspires, and the life from which my will lives. So this is like this is an organism here that's tied up with the way, truth, and life. So you're making those 3 sacrifices to become the way, truth, and life. You see? And these 3 petitions are about that. And that's about becoming Jesus, who is the way, truth, and life. Door. And the other things that he talks about that he is, which I'll go through at some other time. I can't remember them all. But they all have a deep esoteric meaning as well. But like I said, it's not a submission, it's a collaboration. You do submit though, the point is you're not destroyed like in other religions, which are of lesser value, unfortunately, of course, because this is the truth of reality. And so you have to make the sacrifice for this to be. And the sacrifice is of the Luciferian egoic thought. It's really about the sacrifice of this Übermensch, which is tied up with the will to power. It's tied up with the whole technical system and tied up with the hidden forces that are behind it that are the ultimate separateness, which we'll get to as we go on. But I'm pretty sure that we've gone through everything there just in my ranting. Yeah, it's a call for collaboration. That's what it is. It's a call for, don't get scared when I say this word, sacred magic, divine. Maybe I should change it to something else like sacred miraculous. It's a call for sacred miraculous, which is collaboration, which the scepter symbolizes. But this is a great point here, is that to truly pronounce the petitions of the Lord's Prayer, one has to have understood that our will is only truly free in union with that of God, that God acts on the earth only through our free will, freely united with his. Miracles are not proofs of divine omnipotence, but rather of the omnipotence of the alliance of divine will and human will. Of course, he is omnipotent, but he doesn't intervene for a reason unless we ask him to. Prayer matters, ultimately. Only in special cases he does, of course, like incarnating. But let's move on to the next. Give us our daily bread. Now we're into the place of temptation rather than sacrifice. It gets more complicated here, how these things are justified. You can see by the wall of text that's there. But this is sort of connected with what I was talking about already. The petition is it's asking for things to be provided, two things to be provided. The bread that can only come from the word of God, as Jesus talks about, but also physical bread, because this one is about the physical body and physicality and facticity, the place to be able to survive. But it's about those two contexts I talked about before, and the temptation of turning stones into bread. You're petitioning for it to come from his context. That has to be justified by you abandoning the other context, sacrificing the other context. Well, the point is there are two. I'll get into that. I'll just look at my notes again and get into it. But there are two contexts. The one context is HVHY, which is basically saying that everything starts with materialism. It's the opposite of coming from God. It's saying, oh, we came from material, then this happened, then that happened. And then spirit is just an epiphenomenon of all these other material things, right? That's one way of that's turning stones into bread. That's having that as your master. This desire to mold the world from the perspective of the low empirical subject and the low Luciferic ego, right? Which exists because we did all these things, because of the fall from the Garden of Eden, which is tied up with us incarnating. And so for people that are modernists, it'll be hard for them to understand that it began with that, but you get there. But the point is, it's fundamental. But that way of thinking is your master, like I was talking about earlier. Capital is tied up with that way of thinking. When you use capital, it's when you worship capital, you use, it's power. It extends me. I pay for this and that moves. I do this and that, you see? That's most people's master. That's turning stones into bread. It's about seizing the means of power rather than faith in the Lord bringing you into his context, right? It's my low calculative mind can get me enough capital, and that will be that retirement money or whatever it might be. That capital is the ruler, and it will keep me safe, and it will do that, and it becomes your king. And the will for more, the lust for power. This is Araman. This is satanic. It's not to say that you don't use money, because again, it is about this. Give us this day our daily bread. It's miraculous. He can tear stuff out of that context and the dark will that's underneath it. Again, when you, like I said, when you use objects, when you use technical extensions of things, they are wrapped up in their production process. Often you become, as we see more and more with ad agencies and Google, you are becoming a You're the product. You don't master it. It makes you a technical extension of it. And what is that? Nothing more than Satan. It's nothing more than, again, if you've got your hierarchy aligned with God at the top of it, if you pray and you have the miraculous intervention, providence, if intuition's guiding you and what you do, these things will be pulled out of their context, even though they're things you still, like technology that you engage with, you're protected from that technical enframing by the Lord's Prayer, by God, if you do the things that the petitions talk about. So again, it's you come to save the world. You're not withdrawing from it. But it's very delicate. And this comes to also the true meaning of the meanings. There are things going on in reality that you just don't see from the physicalist perspective. Again, like I mentioned, Heidegger talks about this with technology, that there is a context behind things that affects your being, from the technical process that you think you've got it mastered, but you don't. And it's controlling you in a way. There's a dark will behind. He doesn't say it in those terms, but the point is the way communication works, all these different things aren't just words. It's not, it's a mystery in certain ways. And words are not just bits of that are added up together. There's something else going on. Again, I'd have to go into the philosophy of it and go deep into that. But the point is, you have to escape that context. And what was I going to say? It's about surrendering the low calculative. It's about the vow of poverty, which actually abolishes poverty because the miraculous, because the Lord provides for you, because you start following that intuition, because you enter his telos. And this is what telos really means. And Heidegger also talks about this. Telos is context. You have the sacrificial cup. These things are all part of a divine context. He doesn't say divine context. He's just talking about what telos means. But telos isn't just here's your purpose to go achieve this. That's a technical thinking. It's a whole organism. And so you're asking for the Lord to provide daily bread that is tied up with his word and safe and protected. And this also, part of, I think, the justification of this is also giving thanks. So if you're eating something, if you're, say you participated in convenience culture or you go eat in a restaurant, you're participating in capitalism or whatnot. But if you thank him, that's helping take it out of its context. Thanking him. It's brought into his context. Again, these things aren't technical. It's always he is your father. He's not a technique that you bring about. It's a way. It's a way of a personal relationship, and thanking him helps justify this petition for everything. And bringing those things, those dark bread, because again, bread is tied up with the metabolic system when you eat, and that's tied up with the will. And you can, if you participate in these things that are tied up with a darker will and wills that you don't understand outside the context that you know, you just have the thing you're consuming, it will have an effect on your will and what you need later and sin, unless you get it from him. Unless by thanking him, these things are removed from their context. These things are sort of sanctified. You can think about it in that way. But that's the point. So that's what I have here about it being justified by, anyway, I think. Yes, your attitude is incredibly important. And that's where the giving thanks comes in for everything. You're making a choice by making him the provider of your daily bread, but also thanking him for everything that that's good. Everything to bring you and your attitude into the right place, to protect you from the other context and technical and framing. People wonder how they can escape technical and framing. This is the only way. It will always get you in the end. The outside God, the God from outside temporality, The future is the only thing that can keep you out of being just turned into an extension of technology. This is it. And it's to ask him to provide your daily bread, which in a sense also is miraculous. He also knows what you need. So you really, as Jesus says, you don't need to ask him for the particulars. I have trouble with this. I ask for particulars too, but what do you know? What do I know about what I really need or what I should, He knows what you need and he'll provide it. And that's the temptation. I'll just go into a personal thing. It's tempting to, you say, okay, Sam Hyde talks about credit maxing. He goes, okay, the bank, you go in your head, you go, wow, the bank is a scammer. Banks are scammers, right? But the answer isn't to take the money and just not pay it back, credit max, and which you can do, right? It's something you can do. I'm not sure I'd recommend that anymore because you're playing its game. It's saying, well, they sin, then I will too. You only do that if you think that he's the only, that your low calculation is the only way to survive, to get money. But if you understand, as we do, as Christians understand, the miraculous is the alternate way. It's his way. He'll provide you with that. It's very tempting, though, I've been tempted by that, to credit max. Because what you do is you just simply, not to tempt anyone to do it, but you simply take the credit out that's sort of around, it's not worth it for them to go after you for it. And so you just never pay it back. Like say like 10 grand credit card. They're not going to take you to court for that. They'll send plenty of letters, but they're not going to, it's too much money. Cost them way more. Anything that's way more, they're not going to do. And so that's what someone like Sam Hyde did, and put it all in Bitcoin, right? That's a temptation. But you are sinning in that way because you're saying that you're going to pay something back, bearing false witness. But you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that because it's playing its game. You don't need to cheat to do that because the Lord will intervene for you. He has a plan for you. There's an alternate way that's not low calculation. I get why people do it. And I totally, from that modernistic perspective, it's justified in that modernistic perspective, but you don't need it. It's not justified ultimately because it's what it does to you. You become that technical system, that cheater, always trying to get a bit more money, trying to get a bit more. And so that's an example of this in action. You've got to surrender that attitude to him and what he'll provide for you and ask him for it. Don't ask the snake for it. Don't do something serpentine for it. Ask him for it. And it might not be exactly what you want because that could, a low desire. It'll be when you need it. But that's the point. It's about, that's how it's justified, is by getting out of that context. And I've got here, what you're saying is, give us in this present age earthly bread permeated with your influence, even as that heavenly word for which we hunger and long is imbued with your being. It's a human prayer for the power of Jesus Christ revealed through resisting the temptation to turn stones into bread. Like I just said, which is what credit maxing is. You're playing its game. And I get why it's tempting. I 100% get it. But that's what's going on. And so you have to go all in on this. You have to go all in on this. Yeah. I mean, you can get there to understanding, like I mentioned previously, divination sort of does help for moderns to understand that magic's real. But as you participate in this, you'll see the miraculous start to occur. You have to do it first, though. God doesn't breach your freedom. You have to accept him first and his authority first. Then he will do things and provide your daily bread. But he's not going to interfere on your freedom to, like I talked about in the last video, in Faustian Man Comes Home, it's the prodigal son. He doesn't interfere. It's against his will for the prodigal son to go out there and whoring and spending a wealth, which is life, that's been given to him. And the moment he comes back, he shows himself. So you have to earn it, of course, by getting rid of your sin, by making his name holy, and by praying and doing all these things that the religion, you go and do what the religion says. Then the bread's provided. And there's nothing more meaningful than for all this to go on. But it's about grace. And we go, well, what's grace? It's the miraculous. It's divine revelatory action. It's intuition. It's all these things that are granted to you. It's him speaking to you. All that's grace. That comes through effort, through suffering too. If you suffer, that is a type of prayer, going through suffering. Prayer matters. Effort does matter for grace to begin to happen. Prayer matters, the amount of time and effort you put in. But it's, as we talk about in the practice, it's not effort alone. It's a collaboration too. So it's the passive active in those concentration exercises or ways. You're praying at the same time, but you're attending the point and the all. It's a synthesis of those things. It's not like a grasping. Oh, I want to put effort in. You can't force it to happen. It's a collaboration. And so you can see how this is all connected to the physical, the thing that you are. You have the three sacrifices, which are related to spirit, of basically the spirit, the different parts of the spirit, thought, feeling, will. Well, that might not actually be right. Point is sacrifices. You have the sacrifices. And now this is to do with the physical body and facticity and how things happen in the world. But yeah, I think that's pretty much all the different points for that. It gets more difficult as we go on because this one's much more simpler, but the next two are more difficult. But like we've talked about before, this petition, forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. This is the petition that shows the justification. So we've been talking about the justification for all the other ones. And this one shows it. Oh, I went down the wrong way. This one shows it directly. So the petition is to be forgiven your sins. This is essentially asking the Lord to be like a surgical knife to heal you. Because, like we've talked about before, sins change the needs that you have. They change the being, the temporal part of the being that you are. They change. They change a lot. They change a likeness to God into a non-likeness. And you basically start off as non-likeness. But your efforts are to become the likeness, because that's kind of the empirical subject part of it that's in temporality, and then you've got the image, which is you that's in the eternal, the I, and the empirical subject is sort of like the likeness, but it's in the non-likeness state, and that has to be brought into the likeness state for him to be present and holy, for him to be there and a part of your experience and collaborating with you. Without interfering, though, because if it was total, if you got everything you want and he'd be just an extension and a technique. If every question was just answered. But that's what happens with forgiveness, is that, as I talked about in the forgiveness video, you have to do it. You have to, for instance, ask the Lord to bless people like that. That's how you forgive your enemies, because it releases you from the internal return of the same dead being that you are. You are a historical being, and there are things you can't fix, like I said earlier in the video, that no therapist can help you fix, that are part of your temperament, that are locked up with your sin. If you want to think about it psychologically, you can. Things that have happened to you that just keep coming up, embarrassments, resentments, they're giving shape to you can't get free of it. They're giving shape to who you are, And no therapist, again, there are things that therapists can't help you with because they're spiritual. And the only way to have the Lord intervene on your behalf and heal those things, and to heal them, it means he obliterates them. He removes them so they don't come up again. He obliterates their value. You could recall them in memory, but you're released of those, I don't know, whatever the sin things, the things you did, the embarrassments. They're always related to a sin. And my recommendation in the practice for this was, as soon as the thought come up, to ask the Lord to forgive you for it. That's one thing you have to do. Ask for the Lord's forgiveness for the sin as a practice. And you have to identify what the sin is, though. You need to know what it is. So again, at the moment the thoughts come up, the resentments or the lust for power, that's what you do. The embarrassments, which is to do with shame, the moment those things come up with, and the guilt, you have to identify what the sin was and ask for forgiveness. It's not just about, and this prayer helps. This prayer does all of them. You have to do this at the same time, but it really helps the moment it comes up to deal with that, know what the sin is, and ask for forgiveness for it. So again, thinking about it psychologically, you deal with it the moment it happens, and that happens all the time. Things you've done that in modernism that you think were, oh yeah, they pop up for a reason, and you deal with it by doing that. As a collaboration, though, it's not a technique. It's a real person. God's a person. So you need to keep your memory, or the serpentine logic is always will keep endlessly. It's at the start anyway. We'll keep making little tempting things to see things in the serpentine way, as technical ways. Oh, it's just this. It's just I'm doing it. You know, stuff like that. And so you gotta watch out for that. You gotta watch out for that. Yes, and resentments. You have to forgive the people as well. So when those resentful thoughts come up, how do you do that? Not just by saying I forgive them, because that's not going to cut it, is it? That's just a temp. What does that mean? It has to be something real. How do I forgive? How do I forward give to them? Well, you do it as a prayer. How do I do that to my enemies? They've done horrible things. Some people have had the R word done to them. Well, all you're asking for, you ask the Lord to bless them. You ask the Lord to burn off, dissolve the demonic thing that did that. That's all you're doing. You're asking for the demons that provoked it to be dissolved. And so all you're praying for, you're asking for them to find Christ. You can do that for anyone, because you're praying for them to abandon whatever horrible thing that they were, to be that divine image that actually is in them, that they've unfortunately completely abandoned to go into their sin. And sometimes truly horrible things. But you can do that because you're basically praying for Christ to burn off the demons that they were. Well, when you say R means essence. And ultimately, man's essence is, again, that I we were talking about. So that the image, you're praying for them, for the non-likeness to be obliterated, basically, in them. And that is obliterated by them finding Christ. And truly horrible people that have done horrible things finding Christ, they have to go through a harrowing that is hell itself. So by praying for that, you're not praying for a good time, believe me. But what they end up with is, of course, they go through this when they die anyway. People that have done horrible things, facing everything. So, but that's all you're praying for. And you can do that. Ask the Lord to bless them. I don't have any truly horrible things that have happened to me, but this is what has to happen for it to be released. But that's what you do. You bless. It comes up, the resentment, and you bless and ask the Lord to bless them ask the Lord to help them find Him, to be their master. Ask the Lord to help them acknowledge Him and make Him their master, their Lord. And does that part of it. So that's basically the practice of it. We've sort of digressed a little bit then. But what that does is the sin, which is tied up with your destiny, which is the Western word for karma, is an illness. It changes what it throttles and compresses and causes all sorts of what vital energies you have. And you'll have this. You'll be in completely good physical health, but you just have no vitality or anything like that because you have these illnesses, spiritual illnesses. Exorcism's real. All these things are real, man. It's not psychology. That's part of it. That's what is called the astral body, quote unquote, is the domain of will. And that's the domain you deal with when you are doing the forgiving. The resentments are part of that part. But the guilt is deep down. There's sins that you've done. But what was I saying? It grants, like I said, it's a surgical knife. The life-giving forces aren't strangled. The good things aren't strangled. And the others are obliterated. The things that are dark are obliterated through this process. But this is the most important one to understand justification, that something has to be done on your side for the scale, which is now not just horizontal in eye for an eye, which is now vertical. You can have a direct relationship with God and you can petition for him to change the scale. Because if he doesn't change the scale on the vertical, you're just going to be provoked by this river of weird, of what has been this river of destiny that's going to force you to act in certain ways, and there's nothing you can do about it, even when you want to escape it. That's what the vertical scale really is. Because on the horizontal, you can't go back and fix this. You can't fix it by killing that person. That doesn't fix it, eye for an eye. But this does, for you and the world. So I think that helps explain what the difference between is a horizontal and a vertical scale is, that now you can lobby for him directly to intervene. Providence is intervention. It's a real place. It's a real being. It's him. So that's basically what's going on with that. And by doing that, that is really key, the forgiveness thing, letting go of those resentments, all that stuff, for allowing. There's no way to open up spiritual experience by doing this stuff and justifying these things, doing all the different things we're talking about, tied up with the 3 oaths and the practices, and forgiveness is really key to that. You won't get clean spiritual experience otherwise. You can try force your way with the narrow gate, but you'll have lies and demons pop up. You can try take your DMT, but you're going to be possessed by a demon, because it has to be like a surgical knife. The Lord has to help you in collaboration, because if you do it the broad way, not the narrow way, this is all part of the narrow way, through his guidance with him as Lord, you'll get all these illnesses. You'll be possessed by all these demons. You'll raise that all up like people that do Kundalini do. You'll raise all those subconscious elements until one of them possesses you. Like, what do you think a machine elf is? Like messing with, that's Aramanic, it's Techne. That's what the spiritual connect of a machine elf is, like a fallen angel. And what are they? Demons. It's a machine. It's tied up with the technology you use. It's that secret force that's underneath things that you don't realize. And that's what they're seeing when they're on DMT, because they're tied up with illusion, because they haven't purified themselves. Machine elves. Yeah, they're real, man. They're just not what you think. They're not your friends. Oh, no, that's all right. I mean, we love them. We want them to find the narrow way. Bless them, Lord, and help them find the narrow way. Okay, let's move on to the next one. This one is harder to understand. But it's tied up with God doesn't tempt you directly. But there are periods of your existence. In the Bible, there's periods of temptation. He doesn't intervene to, like we said about freedom, he doesn't intervene to stop evil unless it reaches a certain point. Like with Nietzsche, he stopped it eventually near the end of his life. But he doesn't stop them, because he's withdrawn, right? You are Luciferic in that you've incarnated. So without this withdrawal, that couldn't be. So anyway, there are periods of temptation that are allowed. That's fundamentally what it is. And the key temptation this is to do with, and it's, it's asking the Lord to stop that, hold back that temptation. It's to do with being tempted to expect God to prove himself to you that he exists, to prove himself through power, which is, we exist in modernism, and the way that modernism is present is now is Ahrimanic, is satanic, is the technical capital world of the serpent, right? It's that's the serpent's temptation of Christ too, tempting him to prove his power by jumping off the pinnacle of the temple and have an angel lift him up, lest his foot strike a stone. That's what this is about. Before the relationship occurs, you must freely find him. Like, you see constantly people telling testimonials about wrestling with God, saying, "Oh, why won't you speak to me?" Blah, 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 blah. And eventually they say that they ask, and then just one story of a monk I heard recently, and then someone that was a drunk or something like that. And he said, and the Lord said back to him, "That's what I wanted. I wanted for you to ask." And that's what it's about, freely acknowledging. That story probably didn't make much sense, but I don't know. I'd have to really know the details to actually tell it back. But let's just go back into what we're talking about. The petition itself is about mutual confidence. It's justified by me not tempting the Lord to intervene. Because he is a person. You could say it like he doesn't, there's a way things work with freedom. There's a plan for you. And the Lord, you could say it like this: the Lord, your Father, doesn't like you tempting him when it's not good for you for him to be doing that. Because you're not supposed to just be his extension, or else you just be his arm. You're a loved son and daughter. So it has to be this way. And so the prayer is about a mutual confidence for him not to allow you to be tempted, to expect him to intervene in the way. And it's justified again by not tempting him in return, not saying, "Prove yourself to me," before you freely acknowledge the truth and find him yourself freely through purifying the low, serpentine, Luciferic thought, feeling, and will that you are first, so he can approach. That's to freely, and again, by this whole, what's implicit in the Lord's Prayer itself, and going through this whole process is what you do. The 3 oaths and the practices that I've talked about that are related to that, to remove your sin. Then these things happen. Then his bread is provided. And it's hard because you were brought up in that modernistic context. It's hard because you worry. Well, what if I don't have money for this and that? But you are granted faith. Faith isn't a postulative faith. It's not, I believe in this set of laws. I rationalistically have argued out all the points Jay Dyer style. Nothing wrong with Jay Dyer. I just mean a rationalistic faith. I don't think he has a rationalistic faith only. I just mean that if the polemical element of his channel, that helps people come to the faith. But faith is something that is, in Orthodox terminology, you could call it, it's been granted the uncreated energies. It's like having a substance. It's given to you. It's a grace. It's a grace that's granted. Certainty. is granted. As he becomes a real fact, as he enters your blood, for instance, which is a mystical thing that I'm not going to go into today, but it's a very real mystical fact. As you experience all these different things, deeper than eyewitness certainty is that uncreated certainty that's sent directly to your understanding. Because remember, you are this knowing of being. Part of your being is the knowledge that you are. That is you. You're not just a physical body. You're all these other bodies. The unconscious is a body. Memory is the body that is the unconscious. That's all they mean when they talk about astral body. That's what it is. It's not a physical body. It's a body that is memory. What was I talking about again? So that's what that means. That's what you're asking for. That's the temptation it deals with. Because these last four deal with four temptations, as we've talked about. That's the temptation this one deals with. And then there's the last one, which deals with the source of temptation. Deliver us from evil. The evil one. See, this person's even worse than just aromantic, technical, because that's the result. We live in Middle Earth. We're in the halfway point between everything. The evil one is the thing that is most separate from God and away from God. The way Christian esotericism talks about it is it's in what is the darkest point of human subconscious? That will to power, which comes from that finitude, which is part of that egoic separateness. It's about the source for the temptation for seeing yourself as a separate son. I am the Ubermensch. I am the thing that provides all my life. And I am God. A separate thing from you. That's the thing that tempted Lucifer. That separateness is lower than that Aramanic Satan, the technology that's involved with everything. It's sort of its subconscious. It's its source that hasn't made itself present to us. It projects into our subconscious, almost like the eye that I'm talking about is from God. This dark element also projects its lowest element into our psyche, you could think about it, which is the will to power. It's the opposite, as the most separate thing. You could think about it like what sends and drives ultimately serpentine AI. As a kind of basilisk, I suppose you could call it. The esotericists call it the Asura being. I don't know if that name helps anything. You could just call it evil, the evil one. But it does help to see it as the force behind. It's also the force behind the Antichrist, which again you could see it like I've got here. You could see as serpentine AI. It's the thing that promises ultimate power. It's the thing that, again, this is to do with two temptations. One is the promising of the kingdom of this world, of the lordship of the kingdom of this world, which is promised to Christ in one of his temptations. But it's also the synthesis of the three temptations, which happens to, say, yogis and people that try to do this process as their own master rather than collaborating with the Lord. They start to attribute all the things that perhaps they've learned about breathing practice, whatever it might be. They attribute it to themselves and they make it a technique. And then The temptation, the ultimate problem with yogiism is to think the transcendent self is God. And it's a very sneaky temptation. You attribute yourself as master. So even in the world of spiritual development, that's a like incredibly dangerous temptation. And Jung calls it inflation. It's an ego inflation. So you'll have all these faculties, but you inflate and you start to think you're God. You have these people that claim themselves as they're cult leaders. They say, I'm the second coming of Christ. That's what happens through spiritual development. That's the danger of these things. And, but you can see the evil one at the ground of that. It's this separate sun. It's this separateness. Even though the Lord freely gives you all the life forces that you have. And it's so wily. This thing is so wily. It's been around for, millions and millions of years. And he makes fake freedom look like freedom. Because you can see with the prodigal son, you think you're free. When you go out into temporality, you have all these temptations, whatever it is. In prodigal son, he goes to whores and spends all the money and spends his life away, following these temporal desires and making them his Lord until he is enslaved by them. And so what was promised as freedom, to go the way of experiment, to go the way of serpent slithering on the ground. Again, experiment is the serpent's way, the way of evolution, right? Rather than divine revelation and providence. Providence comes back into the picture later. But evolution is a real force, but whose force is it? But you're following the provokings of destiny and karma, which are sending you to a provoked destination. It feels like freedom going with your whims. Oh, I'll have that cake. I'll do this. I'll do that. But then very quickly you're getting fat. You're just you think you're free, but you're just following whims, not the higher thing that you can. You're launching yourself into subconscious desires, thinking it's freedom. But actually those things they don't love you, because love's the ground of true reality. They don't love you like the Father does. But also they want to make you an appendage. This being's ultimate goal is the opposite to the Lord. The Lord wants free collaboration with you. You existing. The Aramanic, the Satanic, just wants you as a economic organ, as a member that just extends his will. That's the ultimate. That's like Sauron in the Ring. It's just an arbitrary will. So you won't even be Luciferic anymore. Because Luciferic is an individual that wants its own control of its own, ultimate control of its own life. Eventually, there just won't even be that for people who don't make the decision. They'll just be an extension of other people. You can see that with technology now, can't you? With ideology. So many people. Pray for them to find the Lord, because the only true freedom is in the Lord, away from this. It looks like real freedom, but it's just a provoking of a arbitrary desire from temporality for the cake, for whatever it is. That's what, eventually you see it. Eventually you go, I just want to be free of these, not free to wander around the world in a van life, not free to go tourism, to have more money. No, I just want to be free of these resentments, these provokings of desires that I can't get rid of, these guilts, whatever they are. You just want to be free of them. But to be truly free too, and that is actually a Buddhist desire. But what the only solution for this prayer to be truly free of the evil one is not just to have that desire fulfilled, which is what the yogis seek, but no, because that is a temptation. At least I know how to escape it. At least I have the spirit. No. You have to wear the crown of thorns. You have to save and bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. You have to help providence come to earth. You have to unite heaven and earth. You can't just go to nirvana. That's the Luciferic part of all their religion, unfortunately. And you can see that's why it's technicalized. You can be nice about it and say it's humanistic and it does help people, but that's as far as you can go. Ultimately, because look, part of our nature is Luciferic. We have an ego, there's various things. So it's not ultimate evil, but it's humanist. And so, there is, I might know about some or talk about some of these other parts of different traditions or whatnot, but ultimately Christianity is the truth. I'm not there's no perennialism. We're not worshiping the same God. Like what the Jays are doing, that actually is just paganism. It has to be the God is love. And who talks about love being God, which is the ultimate ground of things? Christianity does. It's about what metaphysically is true. And when you dig down deep, that's what you find is true. And the closest picture to that is Christianity. And he did incarnate. The Lord incarnated. But anyway, sort of a digression there. But it's justified, this prayer of you being delivered from the evil one. Is justified by you wearing the crown of thorns. You being part of the context that opposes his objective evil in the world, because he is the objective evil one. I think the Orthodox are right about that, calling it the evil one rather than evil, because it is ultimate distance from God. I think that's right. But yeah, man, you can see in all those points, it's very complicated how these last ones work and what they're about. But you can see how the subtlety of that temptation is actually in religions themselves, other religions. But yeah, so understanding that and all those different elements and justifications of the Lord's Prayer, it's really important. You have to know what you're praying about. Know that it's for everyone. It still works. It still works. It still works as a prayer, but the more you know it, the deeper it goes, and the more God can be with you by understanding what it is and what's going on and what it's talking about. I hope that's given people a deeper understanding of everything that's going on, and through that deeper understanding, at least for me, it certainly has been the case, the more the gates of spiritual existence and the miraculous and all the things we've been talking about that this Lord's Prayer is about are open to you. And so I hope it helps that open to other people. But that's the last slide that we've got, ladies and gentlemen. Why don't we have a look and see if there are any questions? If you have any questions, you can send them over. Put some nature on there, but it's been a pleasure to talk about these things and we haven't extinguished the depth of the Lord's Prayer with this. I learned this, but also there are things that became clear to me from this. And I haven't extinguished them by talking about it. And I'm going to repeat that to nauseam so people realize that they can look at these things deeply themselves and should, because the Lord said them. To connect with them is very important. Because through connecting with these things, these are divine things that have been said. And gosh, when you have gone through a spiritual experience and you read these Gospels and realize how they're related esoterically to initiation, my God, you go, there is no way any mortal could have written this on their own. It's just absurd that they could have. Absurd. And the magic that they work, the miracle that work on you, the healing that they work, the Gospels. But yeah, this prayer is incredibly important. It's you should be doing this daily with the Hail Mary too. The mother is very important. I've talked about that already before. But I start every meditation exercise, concentration exercise off with these prayers, with the Lord's Prayer or the Hail Mary with the Lord's Prayer, and then the Jesus Prayer as well. So while you're attending, you should also be able to, like I talk about, attend the breath as well, the belly, while you're doing the attending of what's visual. And you pray this prayer in as the breath goes in and out, and timing it, and that vitalizes these what are psychological things into the body. And that's really important to reconnect the different parts of your being that have been cut up like mercenaries and separated. So praying while attending, also having your attention on the automatic belly breathing, let's say. That's all it is. And that's why the Orthodox are talking about the Jesus prayer and saying it with an in and out breath. They talk about physically saying it. In my experience, you don't have to do that. I do that sometimes though as well, actually physically saying it. Yeah. Also, I want to give we're going to cross over soon to the discussion over in the Discord, which is the second half of this stream. Become a member at scottmanion.com/membership to participate in that discussion. And also, I want to make some book recommendations today. One is Valentin Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot, which is about, not the tarot so much, it's not really about that at all. It's about initiation, a lot of the stuff that I talk about. Another book of his, which he wrote close to his death, is Lazarus Come Forth, it's called. And they're Meditations of a Christian Esotericist. And those two books are really important. There's also a playlist. If you search on YouTube, there's a playlist for the Meditations on the Tarot book. A lot of people that are involved in Jonathan Pageau's community have talked about this book, but you should listen to this throughout it when you're going through the initiation process 6 times. Just have it on repeat, because you won't understand it to begin with. Understanding is something that's also granted through the experience. It's to accompany your initiation. It has no literary value. You can post about it literarily, but it's not really going to help. It helps as an accompaniment to the practice. And everything I'm saying is useless unless it is preparation for your purification, illumination, and union, which are the only things that ever help anything of any religion. It's always purification, illumination, union. And that it's useless without that. So it can be a preparation, but it must be you taking part in the practices for it to the healing to begin, for the actual heaven to be brought to earth. And then hopefully you can help others do it as well, because that's the name, to hallow his name, to help others have him as a fact of their experience as well. That's the crown of thorns. You know, it can be embarrassing. I have to talk about my religious experience. What will people think? F them. Well, help them, right? I think when you talk about something true and authentic, when you have the truth with you, people notice the authority of that. That's a real thing. And so we have to wear that crown of thorns and go out and speak the truth and help other people find it. But yeah, those 2 books you should get. They're available on Amazon, and there's a playlist on YouTube for Valentin Tomberg's book. Everyone who's watching these videos and participating in what we're talking about should do that to understand what we're participating in. And generally, I recommend Rudolf Steiner as well. He's a bit more, just keep in mind with him, he sort of technicalizes things, even though and Valentin Tomberg helps a lot of mistakes that he made. Yeah. There are other recommendations, but I won't go into them today. Let me look to see if anyone has dropped some chats in. Okay. Hello, everybody. Excited to be here. Indeed. Christ is our healer. Absolutely. Yes, purification, sanctification in order to be joined to the perfect one. I agree. Okay. That's everything we have to say about the Lord's Prayer for now. And those are some book recommendations you can get to actually accompany what I'm saying and also to back up what I'm saying. That's an incredible book, The Meditations on the Tarot. It sounds, when the tarot is mentioned, it sounds like, ugh. Just ignore that and read it. Just ignore that part. It's a deep philosophical work. People go, oh, it's a bit, feminine when you think tarot. Just read it and watch the playlist that a wonderful chap, someone Townsend, recorded. You can download those, find some, maybe I could put them on the Discord as MP3s because I put them on my phone. And I found that very helpful. So I put them, Meditations on the Tarot, as a MP3, the ones I've got, and I'll upload them to the Discord. All right, so we're going to cross over to the Discord for a discussion. I'll see you guys next week. I'm not sure what we'll talk about yet, but it'll be something. We're also going to start a second weekly stream that's going to be about reacting to things and curating things, which was supposed to be also part of this show, but it becomes so much like a lecture of, is this still broadcasting? I hope so. Yeah. It's become so much like a lecture because the topic is just large and it ends up being an hour. So there is a whole part of this live show that I haven't been doing. And a big part of that's curation. Like there's a great channel that I want to play some of the videos on, which is called Harmony. I've spoken to them on Twitter and they're excellent films, very moving and very artistic too, very talented artists and filmmaker he is and his wife that do Harmony. And so I'd recommend just YouTube that. Their films are amazing because we need things that create a hill from which we can smile from all the horror. So yeah, there are people making this content. And when we talk about sacred art, that's something pretty amazing. People making films that are orthodox, that are also very skilled too, that have the skill of filmmaking with them. So yeah, look up Harmony. Orthodox, just search Orthodox Harmony in youtube.com. All right, we're going to jump over into the Discord, everyone. I'll see you there. God bless you. And, I pray often for everyone to help them with